Okay. Well, everyone, welcome to the Dailey Edge. I'm here with my brothers, TJ Dailey, Todd Dailey, and this is episode 1. So we've wanted to do this for quite some time, wanted to get together and talk about several things. We've got a lot going on here. And I think we're going to start off with 2025 goals, particularly in the fitness realm. I have 2 sub 3-hour marathoners sitting next to me. And so we've got a lot of experience in fitness, health, and nutrition. So why don't we just start off by you guys giving us a little bit of history about your journey and maybe some of your fitness goals for 2025.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. Should be quicker. I would say my fitness journey started in 2012. I sent TJ a text, and I've always wanted to do a marathon. And I sent him a text and asked him if he would do it with me. He had done one in 2007, right? So 07.
Yep.
You had done Seattle, and I think you were out of shape from that. And he said, let's go. So I think that was in February or March, I feel like.
March, I think you sent me the text, and I started training in May.
Okay. And so I did the marathon, and then TJ and I did that in November, the monumental. And then shortly after, Trent, you said, well, I want to do a marathon. And TJ was like, well, we all 3 got to do it together. So we did another one, same one that following year, right? 2013.
You were talking about being one and done there.
Yeah.
After the
I
first
was one and done. I didn't train for 6 months. It's like, you ever see that Goodwill commercial where like there's like a running thing and
the treadmills got the hangers on it?
Yes,
oh,
exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. That was totally me. And then unfortunately I had to start training again in, I don't know, May or June. And we did another marathon, and then
The one where Trent wanted to walk.
yeah, I remember
The very
that.
end.
I am third, literally. What I remember about that is I remember watching you guys cross the finish line. And at that time, I had Roman. I had one kid. And I was like, it was almost like a scene out of Rudy. I was like tearing up. Everybody's like cheering on. And I'm like, I'll never be able to do this. And I was like kind of in that proud moment. You guys had accomplished something. You broke 4 hours, I think, on your first one. So it was just cool watching you guys come across the finish line. And then TJ, later that next year, he decided to do a 100-miler. And once I saw that, I just, it's like, if he can run 100, I can run 26. So the competitive brother spirit came out. And I think that's where I decided to give it a shot.
Well, that had to be weird for you because you were always there had to be an element of that competitiveness, even seeing us cross the line, I would think, because you were always the stellar athlete. Like, head and shoulders above us when it came to traditional ball sports like basketball and things like that. So, that had to be an interesting thing. And when I get to my journey, that played in. I think you guys have heard me tell that story before, but that had to be kind of interesting from your perspective.
Yeah. I was used to being one of the better, especially because me and you are only 2 years apart. So when we competed as kids, that was the case. Now, as Todd came up, I mean, we were so far apart with that gap, we didn't probably compete as much. But yeah, luckily these days I can settle in being the third fastest in the family. But definitely was a dynamic that there at first, and then when we started training for the 3-hour marathon was kind of the other thing, that how fast are we capable of running, and that's been obviously a goal that you two have both crossed over, which I know is a pretty big milestone as well.
You shouldn't ride 3-wheelers.
Yeah, that's a fact.
You had it.
Yeah, it's possible.
I think one of the things to kind of talk about as you continue telling your story is you're one of the first people, there's this big wave right now in fitness of being this balanced athlete. And so you have new things like high rocks, right? Which is a lot of lifting and a lot of running. So you're doing a workout circuit and you're running a kilometer. And there's CrossFit, obviously, which is a little more on the strength side than high rocks is. But you were one of the first people, we're talking, when did you start Orange Theory?
I want to say it was in the fall of 17. It was shortly after they had opened. I had started that, and that's certainly been a huge part of my journey.
So I think it's worth, obviously, Orange Theory has grown and boutique fitness has grown substantially over the last 7 or 8 years, and is really kind of still leading the way, I think, in terms of fitness journeys for people. That's normally where they start. But you had a pretty significant impact in Orange Theory in your local community, and I think that's important to kind of call out. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think I'm going to.
Well, I think you were there for one of those, so I'll let you get into that a little bit. I was just going to kind of close up, my journey after that second marathon. Then we decided to run a half, and then you never quite got away from it. Yeah. I don't think I ran another marathon for several years actually after that, but then halves and 10Ks and 5Ks were very digestible, and it was fun to run a little bit faster and never quite got away from it. I want to 2016 or 17. I started in Orange Theory, and it was just, for me, it was a fantastic community, a lot of great people that I'm still very close with, and certainly other elements of fitness that I felt like even to this day, I can run 50 miles a week, but I don't quite feel as strong just in general and balanced unless I'm doing Orange Theory. There's just the core work, the rower, the weight floor, and it was something. There's a little bit of competitiveness to it too. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we're all kind of oriented to that a little bit, and so I've really enjoyed that part of it.
Well, I will say, yes, I was, because they do have, those of you who do Orange Theory Fitness, they do have the dry try and turn it into a competition where people from the local studio get together and they see how fast they can complete that. And then in Indiana specifically, and I know it's done different in different areas of the country, but they do regionals and then they do a state championship, which you've won twice.
Won state once. I've won the dry try a few times in Carmel.
Okay, so state once.
Did state once. Yeah, we did. They did in 2019. I don't think they did it again until 23, because obviously fall of 2019 was when I had won it, and then COVID. Here's what's interesting about that, just from a fitness perspective. Growing up, I think for me and just the dynamic of our family and the way things operated, I was very much searching to be the most talented. I found like, when we were younger, for better or worse, there was a lot of, oh, you're so smart, or you've got a lot of natural ability and that sort of thing. And so I found myself orienting just to that. I didn't really care what level I got to, but I for whatever reason, I just tried to be recognized as having the most talent. For me, even in the classroom, I found myself, it was more relevant to me to not do any studying and get an A- than to like completely put my best effort forward and get an A. And so it was interesting. I bring that just to circle this back to that state championship. For the first time, about a couple months before that, I actually started to prepare. It was like the first time. That was a really hard thing for me to do, because the more you prepare and put into something, the more vulnerable, like the failures hurt that much worse. And I remember being in my living room doing the exercises. So the dry try is a 2,000 meter row, and then you have 300 reps on the weight floor, and then you get on the treadmill and run a 5K. And I remember for, I don't know, probably the better part of 6 weeks, maybe 4 or 5 nights a week, I would do some of these exercises. Well, in the dry try, I was the last one. You start with the rower. I was the last one off the rower. I think, TJ, you saw that. I got over to the weight floor, and I probably had the fastest time on the weight floor by a minute and a half. I was the first one off of the weight floor. And so for me, it was just a really, it was a spiritual moment. It was a life all changing. I mean, just perspective to have actually been willing to and had the vulnerability to practice, as weird as that sounds. And then to see that pay off, was really interesting and pivotal part in my journey.
Wow. For those that are listening that maybe haven't started a journey, or like, oh, here you are, winning dry tries at the state, take them back to when you first started running. Kind of tell the audience what that was like.
I mean, I can tell you, for me, I still remember I lived in Westfield, which looked very different at that time. For anyone that's from the area, Keystone and 31 were all stoplights. And I remember I had a loop in my neighborhood that was a mile, and I ran that mile, and I ran it fast. Like, it was I left it all out there. And I remember coming in and, like you couldn't even catch your breath. And I remember thinking, gosh, cold turkey, to be able to go out. I knew I had run somewhere in like the 8.5, 9 minute range. I was like, that's pretty good, because I haven't run at all. Like I'm able to really push myself. I remember looking down, and it was 11 minutes, 15-second mile. And I had left it all out there. So that was the start of it.
Yeah. I think that's important, because running's really interesting, and TJ's going to talk hopefully a lot about it, but it's one of those that you can't really cheat it, right? Like I think everyone starts, I was very similar, 12, 13 minute miles. Like I wasn't a runner in high school, didn't run in college. I didn't really run at all. I mean, I played all sports where you would do some sprinting, but running was one of those things where I'm not even sure I knew how to run until you actually learn TJ's, shorter cadence, longer strides. But I think in every single one of our journeys, it started an 11, 12 minute mile. And it's just incredible what the body can do over time.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point. That was something that drove me. There were a number of things, but that was one of the continual motivators, was how far can I take this body? Because I don't think any of us from this perspective, and the great thing about it is you kind of said it, you can't run from it. It's one of the very few sports out there that's linear for the most part. You both play fairly considerably golf. That is not a linear sport. You can go play 20 hours of golf a week and you're going to get better, but you're going to have days where you go out and it's just like you've never picked up a club before. Mm-hmm. Whereas running, if you're consistent and you're smart about it, you're going to see continual improvement. For the most part, you'll have bad days here and there, but your fitness will continue to grow. And that was always something, I do share similarities with the both of you as it relates to trying to find kind of my place. I wasn't the greatest basketball and soccer player. I wasn't the best golfer. I really was relatively mediocre from a sports perspective. I kicked on the football team, which most people don't even consider kickers a position. Pretty mediocre athlete, throughout middle school and high school. And as I kind of moved into this and saw that I could do okay, a sub 4 hour marathon is a great accomplishment. But then I learned about longer distance things, and I'm like, oh, wow, this could be my thing. And that was the first 2 years probably, is like, I'm going to do 50K or a 50 miler or a 100 miler. And, was going longer was the first kind of path that I went down, because I saw something that could help me really build an ego, which looking back was really self-serving, but got me started, on where we are today, what we've done, built a community. But that's why I like it. I like running, because it's something that will give back to you if you put the time and you stay consistent. And so, my journey's quite lengthy, and we can loop back around and circle back around to that. But, I just wanted to throw that in.
Well, you both said the word community. You talked about that in Orange Theory, and you've talked about it in running. How important is a community when you're chasing fitness or really any goal?
I think it's probably the most impactful thing. And the reason I say that is because, we may go down this rabbit hole a couple of times or off on this tangent. I look at children, and we all have children. We all have children that are active in sports in some capacity. And that 9 times out of 10 is what motivates them to continue. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds aren't often curious as to how far they can push their bodies. That's not something that pops up. But if their friends are doing it, that is how, in my experience thus far, you plant that seed. The first couple of years, go hang out with your friends, go do something with your friends. That fire will grow as you experience different elements of whatever it is you're doing. And I think it's the exact same as an adult. If you're out there by yourself, sure, we all know people that spend a lot of, John Faust, a good friend of ours, runs a lot by himself. And, we've talked about it. There's times that he struggled at times because he doesn't have somebody to call, or somebody to hold him accountable at oftentimes because he's so far away from us, geographically speaking. And when you're running at 4:30 in the morning, he's only an hour away, but that might as well be an eternity. So anyways, I think it's just as important for adults as it is children. I think it's vital.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And I think some of that's our evolutionary wiring. I think we're wired to survive and be a part of the community. I think that goes very deep. There's a lot of our evolutionary wiring that is not really conducive for today's society, and I'm sure at some point we'll get into that. But certainly from a growth perspective, to be able to tap into that is absolutely critical. I mean, Jim Rohn is one guy that comes to mind, and there are multiple people that I think are credited with a similar type of saying, but you become the 5 people you spend the most time around. And I think that just speaks to, I think, that psychological wiring, just that community that's around you. Again, I can't explain psychologically exactly what's happening, but it's certainly, you just find yourself when you're around other people who are in shape or running or doing a certain thing, you just find yourself having that itch to do it.
Do you feel like, I know at the beginning of this year, TJ proposed that we would do a run streak, run every day.
Because it's a leap year.
Yeah, we have to get all 366 days. And I pretty much told him I thought this was the worst idea he's ever had. Like, I fought and kicked my way all the way into...
You wanted to make it to Easter.
Yeah.
You were like, we'll make it we'll just do Easter.
Yeah, I was convinced that Easter was it for me. But by the time Easter rolled around, it was no different than taking a shower. Like, I just do it. And now we're 350. I'm in the 350 range. You're, I know, probably 700 or 800 at this point in time. But the consistency of doing something all the time actually makes it easier. I was really surprised I ran about the same amount of miles this year as I did last year. But when I got my Strava stats, it said I've run 99% more. Like more days.
Sure.
So I've run twice as many days, and just doing that has kept my lows out. I'd run 6 or 7 miles for 2 days in a row, feeling great. Then I would take 2 days off and I'd eat bad, and then I'd feel lethargic. But now that I do it every day, it's made such a difference. So I think there's a part of it that's consistency.
Yeah.
Community has been huge, having someone to run with. What would you tell somebody that, is like, hey, I want to get into shape? Where would they even start?
Well, I want to step back because I think when people start to get into shape or start to think about it, they start to plan excuses. Oh, well, I could. And I really think it's important for you to expound a little bit on what it's taken for you to keep your streak alive. You're not... And there's nothing wrong with this. You're not a stay-at-home dad. Like, you have a busier life than almost anybody I know. And there's a lot of travel involved there. And so, I've seen runs as recently as I think 2 weeks ago where it's like early bird gets the worm and you're on the treadmill at 3:25 in the morning. What has that been like?
Yeah, there's been sacrifices. I mean, I think if I look back at the hardest time is when we went skiing and we were in Vail. And I would ski all day, and then I'm at altitude, and I had to go out and run a mile. And I mean, it took everything I had to run 13, 14-minute miles just from and I'm just smoked. And I'm just, the goal is like you have to run at least a mile for it to count. And I've had to do that a handful of times, especially in Vail, just because I couldn't breathe up there. But yeah, I mean, it's like I plan my day around it. If I don't get it in, it's been a stress reliever for me. And I just, even when I'm traveling, we were in Germany for 10 days and we were on a boat. But the good part was every time the boat pulled up, there was a sidewalk, and I got some of my best miles there. And it's an incredible way to explore. I love traveling to new places and going to run because you really get to see that area better than you would, just walking around. So it definitely was challenging, and it's been a big commitment, but now it's like, I want to do it. I'm not having to go through where I don't want to do it. And then once you get out there, there's just kind of a peace about it. So it's been a good transition mentally. I'm in a much better place than what I was before. Because if you would ask me last year, it's like, I don't really love running. And I still probably tell people that, but I think the important thing for all of us is none of us were really runners. And also from a weight standpoint, outside of Todd's always been slim, me and you have always struggled with our weight. And so that's something that we love to eat. And that's a thing that I still struggle with. And so for those of you that are listening, like, we all had a starting point where, TJ at one point in time in his life was
250
pounds.
260,
What do you weigh now?
165, 160.
So I just want to put that out there that I think we've all been at every phase of a journey for at least most people that are listening to the podcast. And we've had to overcome that with families, with kids, with businesses, with multiple jobs. And so community is a really big part of that. Consistency is a big part of that. Is there any other components that you guys would like to?
I would just say you've got to really understand your why. Someone who says they want to get in shape, my first question is why? Because if the answer is, well, it would just be nice to be in a little better shape, that you got to dig. You're going to have to dig deeper than that. I mean, in my experience, there, as you just talked through that, and not everyone's going to be trying to run 366 days in a row or whatever, but we don't have a lot. I mean, in this society today, as busy as we are and running around, especially if you're a parent or you have, there's not a lot of discretionary time, right? So when you're talking about working out, let's just say someone wants to work out, let's set a simple goal. I'm just going to work out 45 minutes a day, right? It's really easy. Sounds easy. And then you think about work and you think about making meals, taking care of kids, running practices. You maybe, I would say a parent in today's society that maybe has a profession or is, even those who are employed at their home, doing all the things, keeping the house up, maybe have a few hours of discretionary time, maybe. And then you think about that 45-minute workout and you think about getting ready. Maybe you're driving somewhere if you don't have a treadmill. Maybe you're getting back. Maybe you're showering after. That turns into an hour and a half really quickly. And so all of a sudden, 50% of your discretionary time on a daily basis is gone. We're not even talking about the mental hurdle of like, you've got so much going on cognitively, there's no space there, and you got to get over that hurdle just to make the decision to go work out. Sounds horrible. You're thinking about the pain, you're thinking about the, just the gasping for air. For me, I think it's a really, really important thing to understand your why. And I think if you dig deep enough, there's a lot there. But I think a lot of people, I use the phrase, they want to get in shape. And I don't say that in a derogatory fashion because there's a lot of areas in my life where I want to do something, but I'm just not in a place in my life. The timing's not right to put in the time and the energy and the effort into that.
I think you've got to be also, I think there's three other elements here. Patience is a big thing. And being honest with yourself. Patience, you're not, this is fitness. You're not going to see quick results. And if you do, you need to be cognizant of the fact that that's not typically normal and that there are going to be ebbs and flows and there are going to be moments where you're not making the progress you think you should make, right? Because that's just not how the body works. We understand it a little bit, but as most people know, we don't understand it to any real degree of expertise, I guess I would say. So I think that's something you need to be patient. It's going to take, from a running perspective, you don't typically see major fitness gains for at least 6 weeks. And I shouldn't even say major. I should just say fitness gains in general for 6 weeks. So don't think you're going to go out there and run 3 miles once, and all of a sudden you're going to go from an 11-minute mile to a 7:30. Some people are very naturally gifted. There are always outliers. There are always anomalies, but be patient with yourself. And then also, and I say this, you've got to be honest with yourself and you've got to understand, you're going to uncover different layers of this onion as you're progressing. I say this as somebody who struggles with a lot of different things. I've been lucky to stay fairly healthy over the last decade, 12 plus years, and really improve my fitness. But I know I don't do everything right, and I'm honest with myself about that. I know that I could eat better. I know that I could sleep better. I know that I could do more strength work. There's all of these other things that I know I could do that would benefit me. But I'm honest with myself, like, and you do have to make that, and this is kind of a little bit more in depth. You do have to have that conversation with yourself. Like, look, I'm not going to run a 2:30 marathon because I don't want to dedicate that. And I've had that conversation with myself. I don't want to go to bed at 7:30 every night. I don't want to eat completely perfectly. I don't want to do an extra hour and a half of lifting on top of my hour and a half of running every day. I just don't have that in me right now at this point in time of my life. And so I'm honest with myself. And I think that's a big conversation that you need to have and is somewhat relevant to the why. And then the last thing I'll mention, I don't want to digress too much, is fear. And you talked about like getting started. And I see that having founded a track club and having, more than 100 members and having 2 races that we produce and having hundreds of people run those over the last couple of years. And then just having general conversations, as as anybody listening to this knows, when you're passionate about something, a lot of the conversations you have typically revolve around that, right? People meet you and have met somebody else that and they know running's the thing you do. And so that's always a topic of conversation. And one of the things that I've heard so often is, I can never run with you. And what you don't realize, and they're fearful, I can never run with you because I would feel inferior and I would feel slow and I would feel whatever. And what you don't realize is, to somebody who's done this, that community is so important. I would run, if you want to go walk 20-minute miles with me, I'd much rather do that than go run 8 minutes at 5:30 by myself, or 8 miles at 5 minutes, 30 seconds by myself. So overcoming fear is another one of those big things there, putting yourself out there, having the honest conversation.
We'll go back to that a little bit. I was going to ask you just to follow up on your why, because I feel like you've shifted a lot, and you even talked about maybe there's going to be 1 or 2 more kind of goals, levels that you want to achieve in terms of speed or distance. Mm-hmm. But you've talked about your why being helping people that are getting into this. So what's interesting about what you say there, maybe expound upon it just a little bit, is people allowing you to run with them who are just getting started can be huge for your why and keeping you motivated.
Well, yeah. And I think that's why, I talked about 2 events we produce. And one of the things I've always really enjoyed, in a prior life, I threw parties for a living, produced thousands of events. And I always loved seeing a smile on a person's face. It was in a completely different environment at nightclubs and things like that. But the races we produce are very specifically curated to help someone continue their journey onward and to find that next thing that's going to motivate or inspire them within running. So one of them is a 50-kilometer race that we put on the Monon, which is an iconic trail in central Indiana. And, there are a lot of people that have that one and done mentality when it comes to marathoning, and they kind of lose their why. I want to do this because I want to accomplish it and we talk about inspiration. And this is something that kind of crystallized for me years ago. Inspiration can come in so many forms. And a lot of the time it's jealousy. If that guy can do that, then I can do that. And so people are like, so-and-so down the street ran a marathon. Well, I'm going to run this marathon one time to prove to them that I'm as good as they are or better. And then it's over with unless you can catch them in that moment and give them something else to chase that maybe isn't driven by that inspiration, if you will. The full mo is that it is a 31-mile race, so just 5 miles longer. It's a net downhill the entire way. Ultra races, for the most part, and I'm going to say 90+% are run at a much more casual effort. When you're running a marathon, you're running as fast as you can. In most instances, if you're racing it, you're grabbing water, you're slamming water. In an ultra, you're running, understanding that you have to run 31 miles ultimately. And so we've curated that race very specifically to help somebody find that next why and help somebody kind of continue on through their journey. And the other one I want to talk about, our other race is even more so curated and crafted in that manner. I do want to make one more statement though, and I don't want to expound on this too much before going back down that rabbit hole on our other race. I as I told you guys earlier, was always motivated by, or early on motivated by, this is my thing. This is my thing. This is going to, like, you know, my dad is going to recognize me now because I'm doing this, or my mom is going to give, you know, my sporting accomplishments kudos because I'm finally, you know, doing something different or better, or this is whatever. And I was really heavily focused on myself, probably until we started training for sub 3 hour everybody and watching you finish at BQ2. I was always the one everybody else was watching finish, like that right away. Like there was the feeling that I had back when I was throwing parties, watching somebody else accomplish and achieve something. And our other race, Prairie on Fire, which is run in September, is a race. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about the details, but long story short, you can get somebody who has run as little as 2 or 3. The way the race is structured, somebody who's run 2 or 3 miles can come and run 4 miles for the first time. They can run 8 miles for the first time. So the way this race is broken up, just so you know, you guys do understand, is you have the opportunity to run 4.167 miles every hour. And if you complete it within the hour, you can get on the starting line at the top of the next hour and run it again. Right? And then at the top of the next hour and run it again. So if you've run 2 miles before, you can come run 4 with us. Or if you've run 4, you can come run 8. Or if you've run a half marathon, you can come run 16, and so on and so forth. And you get to see so many different people at so many different stages of their journeys, accomplishing so many crazy things, seeing the smiles on their faces, hearing their stories. And that is definitely, for me, completely shifted my focus. You know, like you said, I've got 1 or 2 fast races left in me, and then it's going to be on to really focusing on that. And as well as, you know, my kids that are runners.
Trent, I have a question for you. Not everyone's goal oriented, right? And I know you've kind of fallen into that camp at times, that like it can be this check a box thing, and like that structure almost in of itself can be overwhelming. Like for people who aren't necessarily goal oriented, like certainly this year, right? The streak has been a part of that. But what's your journey been like there?
Well, when we first started, there was a couple of goals. It was to break the 90 minutes on the half, right? The sub 130 when we hit that a couple of different times. And then running Boston was obviously a goal. I think this goes back to what TJ was talking about, which is like, I have 4 kids, as you guys well know, but so the ages that my kids are, and I'm in one of the busiest times of my life, and it is, I don't want to say, because I think a lot of times we'll say, oh, well, I don't have the time. It's like, I'm not willing to sacrifice the time, and I'm being honest with myself. It's like, look, you can run half marathons. I can run half marathons. We can go out and run one tomorrow, right? Like that, you can do that and not have to train a lot. When you're training for a marathon, it's a 50 miles a week, and I'm not going out to run a marathon unless I'm going out to run a marathon. And so, you know, the last one didn't work out as well as I wanted it to, but I realize right now, like, I just don't have the desire. And I think a lot of that is what you were also saying. I'm chasing it for myself. Okay, so then I run a 3:05 and qualify for Boston. Like, it just some of it has lost its importance to me. I was trying to get significance from it. And now I'm just kind of like, I just want to be healthy. I want to feel good. And so I've kind of settled into where if I can feel good, and I don't know if I'll ever go for a sub 3 again. I'll probably have different goals. We talked about maybe 2025 is the year I actually run one of TJ's races. I think there could be some fun stuff there, but I'm just not willing to sacrifice the time.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I will say personally, I go back and forth because I do find, especially in training season, that it can be really, really healthy for other areas of your life too, right? So I saw a meme the other day, and it was like, you should go out into nature for 20 minutes a day, unless you're really busy, and then you should go out for an hour, right? Which is like, you know, for me, I kind of translated sitting out in nature with prayer, right? Or like spending time spiritually. But I think that's a really interesting thing, because I think sometimes the busier we are, we a lot of times we squeeze out the important and we let the urgent in. And I think that can be a trap. And I fall in that trap on a daily basis still. And it's something that I think I bounce back and forth with. I struggle. I want to be healthy physically and mentally. And how do I do that? Is it like, it's almost counterintuitive that, I should make sure I'm spending more time running. Not to go too far down the spiritual rabbit hole, but I was at a conference a few months ago, and the gist of the speech of the keynote speaker was that prayer actually multiplies time. It doesn't actually take time; it multiplies time. And the angle similar to fitness, in that if you spend the time there, that can give you such clarity and such focus that your productivity in other areas of your life goes up exponentially. So I've always struggled going back and forth with that, but I think TJ, you were going to jump in.
No, I just think you're spot on there. I think that's really important. I think one thing that you'll find, if whatever type of fitness journey you take, you never feel bad after a run or workout.
Right.
Like never.
100%.
If you get it done, that is going to give you that, there's been a lot of discussion, and there's this, I don't even know, maybe it's a myth, maybe it's not. It's really hard to pinpoint the runner's high, if you will. There are times when you're running where you feel very, very fit and it feels effortless and it's enjoyable. But I wouldn't say the runner's high is anything more than just feeling accomplished. It's like, man, I went out there and did that. And the more difficult it is to get out, the better you feel afterwards, or the more difficult the accomplishment, the better you feel afterwards. So I would kind of align with what you're saying there. I love that feeling every single day. And I love the feeling that again, you get out there and you get from the community. And if you can accomplish a number of those things, if you have people to reach out that you can go out there and you can help hold them accountable, and then vice versa, you're just accomplishing all of these different things, and you're suffering for what's this greater good, if you will. So I just wanted to add that on.
I want to go back to your question just for a second about those who are starting early. In addition to knowing your why and really understanding, like, is this really worth it? As you guys have talked a couple of times, being honest with yourself, I would say start small. I think what some people forget is that when you're starting a journey like this, you've got physical hurdles to overcome and you have psychological hurdles to overcome. And I think doing those both at the same time is way more difficult than a lot of people give it credit for. It's extremely difficult. If you guys have read Atomic Habits by James Clear, really good book. He talks about when you're trying to build habits, start small, start really small. And it's like if you want to start working out, wake up and get dressed. And maybe that's all you do for a week, is you wake up and you get dressed, and then you go back to sleep or you do whatever. And then you show up at the gym and you go there for 5 minutes. You walk in the door, maybe you get on a machine, maybe not. And then you go home for a week. And it's because you're knocking out in those times, you're knocking out the psychological hurdles that you're running into, right? Of like, I don't want to get up. I don't want to do this. How many times have we started to train for something and we've gone completely all out right out of the gate, and then you flame out, right? So I just I would encourage people to not feel like they have to accomplish that all at once, the physical and the mental. Start extremely slow and appreciate the fact that even if your physical fitness is not changing at all, your psychological makeup is changing, and that's really going to be huge in sustaining a journey.
Well, and I think what a lot of times we do is we come in, 2025 hits, and it's like, okay, I'm making these physical commitments, and then I'm completely changing my diet, and then I'm going to completely change this habit. And you're like, so you stack them, right? Which can make it even harder. They say the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of change. You'll finally change, right? Like you don't. And so to get that type of leverage and trying to do all those at once, it still isn't going to be feasible. I even know now with the running, I'm trying to do some core, and I'm trying to do some stretching. And so I found people that understand that better. And I went and met with someone and I said, I'm not going to the gym. I need a 5-minute workout. And she gave me a 3.5 minute workout I can do every day. And then I throw in 25 push-ups. Like if I tried to say I'm going to hit the gym twice a day on top of running, it just wouldn't happen. And I just know that I'm not going to make that sacrifice. So I think you're spot on with how do you take baby steps. And I know a lot of people just get on a treadmill and do a mile, walk it and jog it. And then like, if you want to get into running, if you're capable of running and you get out there, what I would recommend is the same thing that John started with, is like, get on the treadmill and start walking and then jog and then do a walk, jog until you can get to about 3 miles. If you can run 3 miles, you can run a half marathon. And so just kind of building into that, realizing it doesn't need to happen overnight.
Let me ask you guys a question about goals. I've been thinking about mine for 2025, and I've been struggling a little bit. My mantra has always been goals breed habits, and habits breed change. So I've always been goal oriented, right? But what I'm really struggling with this year is maybe not setting a goal of like a pace target or a distance target, but setting a goal of like, I want to maybe run 5 hours a week or do something fitness wise 5 hours a week. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking about that, just trying to be thoughtful and mindful about, will I be able to sustain that? Is there enough motivation there versus I want to qualify for Boston the next year at Boston this year. I want to run the full mo and sub 4 hours, like an actual time goal that's going to have workout accountability and mileage accountability to it versus just like a habit focused goal. Like how do you guys set your goals? Like what's worked well for you, and got any advice?
For me, I don't know. I'm definitely not as goal oriented as you guys, but I try to keep it fun and try to keep it unique. I look at a lot of people, in the running community, and Strava, for those of you who don't know, is a big social media platform for endurance athletes. And I look at bios, and typically you see a bio. If they're a trail runner, it'll have their 50K time, their 50-mile time, their 100-mile time, or how far they've gone from a distance perspective. And if they're a road runner, it's going to have their 5K, 10K, half marathon times. And that's pretty standard for people. What I like to do is accomplish other stuff within whatever it is that I'm passionate about that's strange. Running every road in the city of Westfield. Running every road in the city of Carmel. Running relays with my buddies in different states across the country. Going and crewing or supporting somebody or pacing somebody in a big race. Doing things, running a streak. Something that you haven't ever done before. And it requires a little bit of pre-planning, a little bit of exploring, like as opposed to, because the grind is awful. And the better you get at something, the more arbitrary your goals become. Like, okay, I broke 5 in the mile at 44 years old. What's next? Who cares? Same thing with, you break 240, whatever in the marathon. Nobody knows what that means. And again, that I guess assumes that you're doing whatever you're doing for other people, but you get to these levels and it becomes just so arbitrary unless you're, again, competing at a level where you're one of the best in the country or one of the best in the world at whatever it is you do. There's different things that drive you there, but I don't know. I think that keeping it unique and fun and trying to find different things that you've never done before, and being open to, and this is an Achilles heel of mine. I say yes a lot when it comes to that. Like I'll have a good buddy of mine, we call him the unicorn. He'll call up and be like, hey, you want to go run a 50K today? Just on a whim. Probably not the smartest thing to do, but it keeps it fun. And that brings your weekly average up. You've got your 5 hours in one shot. So that's my approach.
I'm trying to think about the last time I set a fitness goal, and I think honestly, I just do what TJ tells me to because I'm afraid of being kicked out of the family. So I think most of my fitness goals have come through peer pressure. It's just been, hey, let's go do this. Let's go chase this. And I think I generally start being, I come kicking and screaming, and then I eventually kind of settle in. And part of that is just, I don't know. I don't have a lot of motivation in that area, but what I can say is what keeps me in there is community. Like I've got a couple of people in Marion that we run, and it's like if I know someone there's waiting for me, I'm there. It's just there's that level of community, and trying to, anytime you can do something with other people, makes it that much better. But I haven't done a really good job on the goal setting side. I focus that probably more on the business side, but I think it's great to have other people around you, the 5 people around you that challenge you. And they need to challenge you mentally, spiritually, and physically. When you talk about your different circles and the different big buckets, having the right people around you, sometimes you're pulling and sometimes they're pulling, but definitely important.
One thing that I've started to recognize as we get older, I'm the oldest of the 3, so I'm in my mid-40s. And, one of the other things that's driving goals for me is quality of life. Finally, we're getting to an era. So I ran today with a 17-year-old. And it was, let me tell you, the kid he's amazing, but I am facing things that are considerably different than what he faces on a daily basis. And so trying to architect a plan like, hey, my goal is to be able to get out of bed and not hobble for the first 30 seconds. And one thing you do get, it's just kind of crazy. This is an interesting moment, but I had a conversation with our dad the other day. He's in his 70s. And I was having issues with my knees. No, it's not because of the running. I was having some systemic things, and we thought was potentially rheumatoid arthritis. And so I reached out to him to see, do you have any issues like this that were very acute when in your mid-40s? Luckily, he hadn't, so I feel fairly confident from a genetic predisposition that it wasn't that issue, and it's since subsided. But he said, as you do get older, you do. He's like, I am tight in the first couple steps in the morning, and it does loosen up after a time. But he's also started riding his bike again, considerable amounts of time, an hour and a half a day. So, I think for me, doing some of these extra things, making sure that I'm more mobile, that adds extra time. One of the things that I've been guilty of in the past is monster workout. And then I just sit the rest of the day. Mm-hmm. And the next morning I can barely walk. But getting a little bit more mobile, that's going to add time in, and just being more present about, lean mass. And we can go down that rabbit hole all day, is the longevity guys talk about all of the metrics that are very important. We say longevity guys, your Peter or Tias of the world. All of the other metrics that contribute to greater quality of life as you get older. So I started lifting again for the first time a couple of months ago. And so that's a big focus for me. And it's compounding my focus on fitness, but I feel better in the morning. I'm able to do things with my kids that I probably couldn't have done as easily running only 70 miles a week and not doing any other types of movements. So, that's something that's also helped me grow the breadth of my fitness journey.
I want you to talk about one thing, because the number one indicator for longevity of life is VO2 max.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So VO2 max is the ability of your body, how quickly or how much oxygen can your body intake and then process out through your bloodstream. And it's extremely important, and that's achieved through fast interval work. So you guys, those of you watching, if you've ever heard of high intensity interval training, HIIT, or what some of the stuff you do at Orange Theory, where you have your different tiers and you're doing sprints, or 400 meters. So it's stuff that doesn't necessarily feel great, but that is a huge piece of the puzzle. The more capability you have cardiovascularly to intake oxygen, the more dense your capillaries are, the higher your mitochondria density is, the better those things function. All of that comes through different types of endurance activity, but it's extremely important. So, that actually kind of plays to your point about starting small. If you can get on the treadmill and sprint for 30 seconds 10 times with a minute in between, or a minute with a minute in between 10 times, 30-second sprint might feel like a lot. Some people, most people, frankly, it's probably less than 100 meters. So think about running the 100 meters in high school. You do that a couple times a week, that's going to improve your VO2 max significantly and really help you from a longevity perspective. I mean, I forget what the number is, but it's like 5 times or 10 times less likely to die from all-cause mortality if you have a VO2 max in the top 10% of your, and don't quote me on that, but I think that's what it is. We can throw up a graphic or something. But top 10% of your age range.
And that, I think, is just so important because you said endurance, so that could be swimming, that could be cycling, that could be running. I know a lot of this conversation has been about running because that's the activity that we're involved in. But the one thing that I will say, since I started running in 2014, and I was probably 20, 25 pounds heavier than what I am now, the key factor to all this is energy. And what I noticed doing this as much as I like to do, if I wasn't taking care of my body, if I wasn't sleeping well, if I wasn't exercising all the time, I didn't have enough energy to be able to be a good father, to be able to run several businesses. And so there's one component as you start your journey into getting in shape, if that is one of your goals, is really to raise your energy level. Because at the end of the day, if you have more energy, you can accomplish more. And so that's something that I think I took for granted, or I probably didn't even know at the time that I didn't have energy because I didn't know any better. And when you start to get in shape, you start to lower your heart rate, your heart starts to beat less, and your body becomes more efficient. And now all of a sudden, I was finding that I could do so much more mentally and physically. And so when I talk to people that own businesses and we talk about different things about, like, you know, how hard you have to work and things you have to do, is like one of the primary things you have to do is you have to take care of yourself. Because at the end of the day, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to have good energy and you're not going to be able to last over a long period of time. I mean, anybody can grind it out for a decade or two, but that's been probably the biggest change for
I like
me.
that comment, though, that you just made about grinding it out a decade or two. I think that, you know, I'd heard this discussed in the past around the term grit. I forget the name of the lady who wrote the book, but I remember reading that book and her saying that there are so many people who have misconceptions of what grit is. You know, like going and working on Wall Street and working 90-hour weeks for a year to you know, elevate yourself within the, that is not grit. You know, doing stuff for 20 years, showing up every day. And I think it's become so much more difficult with the instant gratification culture. And you've been having this discussion for a decade now, right? Because we've continued to see the evolution of technology and the ability to get things much, much quicker. And so I think being able to fly in the face of that is really, really important, you know, for us as humans. And, you know, there's nothing more gratifying than being able to show up consistently for yourself and show up consistently for other people. The reward that comes with that is greater than anything you would ever get from an instant gratification pathway. So I think that's important to call out.
Trent, why don't you continue on? You were talking a little bit of just about getting started in this and your journey. Is there anything else? I mean, some of this I think for both of you we've touched on, but what gaps would you fill in just about your journey?
I don't think I ever would have started this on my own. So I would go back to community. Community is what has continued to allow me to focus on my physical fitness. It's an area that I don't love by nature. And so it's one that I have to have a really strong community in, and I'm grateful.
Talk about that a little bit. You mentioned just briefly that you went and watched TJ run 100 that summer.
Yeah.
Which was crazy.
That was crazy. And then he ran a 500K, which was it might be the most impressive thing I've ever seen, but go ahead.
Yeah. There's probably a whole nother podcast for those. But talk to me a little bit about that experience. I think when a lot of people think about getting into something, going and spectating is probably not the first thing that they think of, especially someone that you might know or is close to you. But talk a little bit about that experience and what that was like and how that maybe, expound a little bit on how that lit a fire under you.
Yeah, so it started when you two ran the marathon together. There was some emotion there, and that kind of piqued my curiosity. Like, there's no way I have the time I have a newborn child. And then when it came to TJ decided to do the 100-miler, we were all going to go out and support that. And we could pace him, right? We could pace him for a certain amount of miles. And it was like, okay, well, I'll start running. So we don't have to worry about pace because it's 100 miles, and he was, running probably 10.5 minute miles. So it wasn't a pace thing. So you may have even encouraged me like, hey, why don't you get in shape and like start running, and you can run 6 to 8 to 10 miles with me, kind of jump on and off the course. And that was kind of the first time like, okay, well, I can get in shape, because running 6 miles felt a heck of a lot easier than 13 instead of like, and then because when I saw you guys do the marathon, I was like, oh, I got to do 26. And that dream was too big for me. I just couldn't swallow that. So when I saw TJ do the 100 and I got to participate, and I think there's even a time where I did like 8 to 10 with him, and I was like, I think I can go more. And you're like, you hadn't been on the field yet, but I was like, I was already getting that energy from being out there with him and kind of being a part of it and seeing him accomplish this and what he was going through. I saw him at 48 or 50 miles. He had been taking gels for the first 50 miles, and he never done it for that long. And so at 50 miles, he literally puked all his gels up and started eating some really real food. And I'm like, and he has 50 miles left. And I'm looking at this like, he's insane, which I've already known that. But like, it was one of the wildest things to see the mental perseverance and how he brought himself back together and finished. So like, he finished 100 miles, and I think we, took him to the airport in a wheelchair the next day. And so
true story.
Seeing the mental toughness from that, I walk back and like, I can't not, right? And part of it was the competitiveness. It's like, if my brother can run 100, surely I can run 26. He's not that much more physically gifted. And what it was is he's mentally stronger, and proven to be ever since then. Like the mental toughness that I saw in the 500K was beyond anything. I mean, dude had like shin splints and had 170 miles left. And it was just, and so much of life is mental. And that I needed to see that type of accomplishment. I needed to see that type of drive to let me know that I was capable of it.
You mentioned there for a second, if he could do this, I could do this. We both have talked about this a little bit, and I'd love for you guys to expound on it just a little bit. It's just an interesting observation that all three of us, the reason we started running and the reason we started setting the goals and wanted it so bad, has really nothing to do with why we're still doing it today. Like, it's been really interesting observation how that has evolved over time, whether it was the competitiveness of, well, he can do that and I'm a better athlete than him, or I can do this, or this is going to be my thing. Like, anything that you guys would add to that evolving over time, because I don't know, it jumped out as interesting to me.
I wouldn't say evolving over time, but I'd say don't be afraid to use it. Don't be afraid to find something and use that. There's a good friend of ours. I'll name him in a later episode, but he creates completely fake competitions with people that don't even know he exists, but it's to fuel that fire. And he's not afraid. He'll admit to his friends, so-and-so doesn't know my name or who I am, but they're my target, and they're my target for X reason. So I would say that don't be afraid to use that to get you in the door. Use whatever you need to use to get you in the door. And then it will evolve out of necessity, because you can only go back to the same well so many times. Like you said, like you don't really have the desire to go sub 3. For whatever reason, I went back to that well for 7 years. It took 7 years to break 3 hours in the marathon. And but that's coming to an end. And I can see that is you hear a lot of NFL players or PGA Tour players that are in the twilight of that career. I can see the 19th hole, right? Like, I know I'm done. Not because I've lost the passion for it, but like, I'm done. I'm not interested in going to that well anymore. I want to find a new well to tap into. So get in any way you can. Use, if you want to look better than the lady down the street, then there's your motivation, and you start there. And I promise you'll eventually get to where you want to be.
Yeah, I think for me, it's as I get older, it's just most of the drive of a young man is competitiveness, and I just don't care, because I don't identify as that as much anymore. Like, it's not important that I have to be the best. And maybe that comes because I'm in my early 40s, or maybe that's because I'm more focused on my kids. But where I have been more internally focused is been because I want to be better than someone else sitting next to me or across from me. And I've kind of realized that that's not my identity, and I don't need that to feel good about myself. Although when I do it, I still feel good about myself. So it's still there, but it's not driving me like it was when I was younger.
TJ, what about, we haven't talked, I mean, you've touched on parts of your journey. There's obviously a lot of content here, but what would you add to kind of what you've already touched on?
I was on X the other day, and a buddy of mine tweeted, which is weird to call it X and not Twitter, but he just tweeted whatever out. What is something you wish you would have done in your 20s? And it was, my thing was, I wish I would have explored the full potential of my fitness in my 20s. I would have loved to have seen where I could have gone if I'd continued from Seattle onward without a break. That would have been awesome. But as it relates to my journey, it's really just, I've had a great time continuing to explore the different aspects of my being through running. So initially it was, I knew that I've always had this kind of ability to just lock on, like say I won't, and just do something where, when I cross the starting line, the only option is finish or death. And I mean that almost as literally as I can. Whether it's throwing up, whether it's having perineal tendonitis or something like that in a race and still having over 150 miles to go. Like there's nothing that, so early on it was, let's take advantage and explore how far we can push this mentally. And then once we've kind of gone through that, we've run 300 miles in a 6-day period. Then it was, okay, physiologically, how far can I push this, and exploring different things. And then, we've talked about utilizing different forms of motivation throughout. But, for me, and I know this sounds redundant because we've talked about it a bunch when it comes to community, but, there are people out there that surround us that are wired in a way that they will never lose that competitive fire and that they will burn it to the ground. And I think we see those people in a lot of different sports. Your Michael Jordans of the world, your Kobe Bryants of the world. And I don't take that for granted. I don't take that lightly. I see people out there doing that. And that does allow me to say, if they can, then like you said earlier, if he can do this, then I can at least do this. So being thankful that we're able to have people in our group that are wired like that and that can show us, the art of or what is possible. I think those have all been things that have kind of contributed to, we will talk about my journey and some of the specifics of different things, I'm sure, throughout these next couple of episodes, but just staying somewhat high level for now, that's a weaving kind of all over the place. And I know I'm kind of here and there with it, but if I were to add anything in for my journey, those are the kind of highlights and the things that stick out, testing those different elements of my being.
Let me ask you a question about the human body, but it's to both of you. I can tell you one thing that I've been, through my 12-year journey, I've been blown away at the capability of the human body. And it's triggered me at times to think about the times in history, right? 30, 40, 50,000 years ago, like you think about the conditions and the lack of resources that people had to survive in that time. And times where, we've evolved from that, right? Where I feel like in my, and just thinking about this, I think we leverage in today's society a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the capability of the human body. We live such in a convenient world. And you think about some of the thresholds and levels that the human body was pushed to historically. We never achieve that unless it's volunteered, right? Unless we actually engage in it by choice these days, right? So talk to me like maybe just things that you've learned about the human body, because you mentioned this. I think a lot of people are thinking this, like, I can't do that. Like, that's not me. My body's not, right? But like, talk a little bit about what you've learned about maybe your own body, but just the human body in general.
I just think it's it can do so much more than you think it can do. Mm-hmm. I've got from a personal example, my story is very similar to Trent's. When I started back in 2012, I ran a mile or two at 11:52 pace, or your story in that regard. And again, I mentioned it earlier. Now, I'm going to say this, and this is relative. Again, the people you surround yourself with, is an amalgamation of who you will ultimately be. So, like, I'm not as proud of these numbers as I would be because my context has changed so much. But from a guy who couldn't break 11:30 in a mile to at 44 breaking 5, that doesn't make any sense, right? Or a guy who it took 7 years to run 3 hours in a marathon, who his first marathon was 4 hours and 7 minutes, to be able to run in the 240s. All of these things, to be able to run a 10K at 540 pace. We don't have any genetic history there. We don't have any relatives that were phenomenal road runners or phenomenal cross country or track runners. Zero. And it's taken 12 years. And I just think people quit before they ever get there. But the things you can do, I have a good friend that I've been hanging out with a little bit more recently. And, I think oftentimes you paint yourself into a corner. Like you said, I'm this type of person and that's it. I'm predispositioned for whatever it is. Well, this individual held a few world records in the powerlifting side of things. So at 183 pounds, he could pull a 705-pound deadlift 3 times. So a guy like that, you would never think could run. I mean, his body's obviously built for one thing, and it's lifting heavy weights, bench pressing 500 pounds. He went out to that race I talked about earlier, Prairie on Fire this year, ran 70 miles. So, when you think that you're a particular type of person or that you can't do something, you just have to give it time and you just have to show up and be consistent because it's such a phenomenal.
I'll add a little bit to that. I think the mind gives up way before the body, right? Like that's been clear in all of our journeys. If you've run a marathon, the mind's given up. It's called the wall, and it hurts. But the other part of that I think is so important is the way to get through that is the group of people. So like, you maybe want to talk about the track club that you started, but I always try to put myself in a room where I'm close to the bottom. Like I want to be the slowest guy in the room, the guy that does the least amount of mileage in the room, because that's what helps me elevate. And so when, I'm doing 25 to 30 miles a week right now, kind of in maintenance mode, and there's other people doing 60, it's inspiring. Like it's good to see those. If I'm leading the pack at 3, 4, 5 miles a day, I'm going to be at 1 or 2 miles at some point. Like I need to see those. Oh man, that dude ran 9 or 10. Like, so I think finding those groups and finding groups to where you're just barely hanging in there, because that's going to eventually, I think, elevate, and it's elevated me to do more. You recently did that. You ran 100 miles at the Prairie. So talk about the mental toughness there and kind of what you worked through during that process.
Yeah, that was a journey. You mentioned the mind quits first, and there's 100% truth to that. What was interesting about the 100, in running a marathon, your mind quits on you 2 or 3 times. Your muscles, I feel like, were kind of the second to give up. And then your joints start to hurt, especially around 20 to 22. The new level for me in the 100 was your organs. Like you can feel it internally. You could feel the exhaustion, and it was a mental battle. I don't know how else to describe it, but there was a level of exhaustion there. I've never been able to relate to someone just in the fortune of my life. I've never been able to relate to someone who says I stood up and I was exhausted, right? After that 100-mile race, I remember going home at 9 a.m. It was about just shy of 24 hours. Went home. I took a nap for 6 hours. I remember going to mass that afternoon, and I couldn't stand up. like I stood up and I was doubled over the pew in front of me. And when I was kneeling, I literally was leaning my body weight on the pew in front of me because I couldn't fully stand up without losing my breath. It's just and I think it's context, right? You reach these new levels of exhaustion that puts everything else in context. And TJ, you've talked about this a lot. One of the things that I feel like in my fitness journey, just some of this has happened naturally, some of it's been intentional, but each year there's usually something that I kind of push beyond my previous knowledge boundaries, and it sets a completely new context for what tired is or what it means to be exhausted. I mean, we all have young kids, right? And I think sometimes we experience this frustration when they run 100 meters or whatever, and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, and like I can't do any more, my legs hurt, that kind of thing. And when you run 100 miles or 20, and certainly there are different thresholds for kids, I'm not saying, but there's some other factors, and we were that same way at that age, right? So trying to relate to their context and help them push through that. Something I've actually been giving a lot of thought to is there's a lot of people now doing, I think one of the groups that run some of our races, Do Hard Things guys, right? And I think there's I wish I could remember the name of it, but there's a sort of a tradition that sources back to a Japanese tradition where it's like, this isn't exactly what it is. I think we have changed it a little bit, but doing one hard thing a year. And what's really been really neat about that, and me just piecing all this together, is it reframes your confidence or your context for whatever that happens to be. And I started to think about that for kids, for my kids or our kids, or can we help them in whatever facet they're potentially interested in or passionate in, achieve one hard thing in a year just to help them reframe that context. Because until you again, reframe those boundaries, it's very hard. It's very,
we talked
very hard.
about that on the drive up here.
Yeah.
Was exactly that. And again, this entire podcast, this entire group of podcasts will only be about running, but I do have my oldest daughter is a runner. I think she's the one out of our 10 total kids that is a runner. But I was asking her this the other day. She ran the same race he did, and she ran 7 yards. So she ran almost 30 miles. She's 10. Now, disclaimer, this was on her own accord, and she has worked up to this. But anyways, I asked her, I said, is going out there and running and running cross country and running track and doing these things, does that change your perspective on school? Because she's doing really well in school. And if anybody who knows me personally, this was not a strong suit of mine. I was awful in school, but she's doing really well. And I said, well, is doing these hard things, is this just change your perspective on, if you can go run 30 miles, how hard is doing homework? It becomes nothing. And I think there's something that you said that's kind of a two birds with one stone thing. If you're able to, through community, get kids started early in these endeavors and have them experience these 1 or 2 hard things a year, you're doing a couple of things. First of all, they're going to experience the things that maybe somebody else missed out on because they didn't start early enough. So they're going to see where their physiology could go. So that's going to be a really cool thing for them. But they're also, like you said, going to have this phenomenal context for what really hard is. And that is something that, from a life lessons perspective, I mean, man, I'm sure you guys, and I'm going to go on this tangent because I'm sure you felt this way. I know I did, because we grew up in the area where technology was booming. And I can remember getting my first job, and back then people stayed at places for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I remember hearing people say, oh, I waited 5 years, or I got this promotion 6 years in, and just could not comprehend. Like, you mean locking in for more than 6 months? And that's because, no fault of our own, we grew up in an environment where we didn't have these contextual things that helped us understand what real hard, long endeavors took from a mental fortitude perspective. And so, man, to that point, just invaluable to set that context early if you can do it through the method that works for your family or for your kids.
But that plays in just to everyday life. Like, if you're getting up at 6 a.m. and you're running 4 to 6 miles, like, how many people are doing that? Less than 1%. And once you do that, like, everything else for the day seems easier. I remember like if it's a Saturday and I get up and go run 6 miles and I get home and my wife's like, hey, can you do the laundry and do this, do that? Like, yeah, like that's like, I mean, I got to walk versus if I don't do that, everything's like, so I think there's the broad contextual reset, but each day when you choose something hard or choose to do something, or you put in 30 minutes of workout, I think it makes the rest of the day go a lot smoother. It makes it easier. It makes it all seem much more digestible.
I want to go back to something that reminded me, when you were talking about doing the 100 at Prairie. Again, this is the race that we talked about earlier where you run 4 miles every hour. So he was awake for 24 hours. We did a documentary on this particular event and you've both seen it, but there's a moment in there where we're talking about kind of your journey. I think that 100 potentially, and I'd like for you to talk about this a little bit more, was a microcosm of everything we've talked about that has gotten us to where we are on our journey. Like I think coming into that day, we had talked a couple of weeks earlier about your goal, and it was 100K, something to that effect. And then the morning of, you had talked to our co-race director, Corey, and you're like, yo, I don't even know if I can run 4 today. Like, I just don't feel good. But there were a number of different things I think you used throughout that 24 hours to, whether it be compartmentalize or motivate yourself. And I'd like you to talk about that because I think they're all of the elements of that journey packed into 24 hours.
Yeah. I'll try and hit on them. I think one of the earliest ones was helping Kay. She had hit 4, which is what she had hit last year. And she was struggling with that. And you said, hey, I need you to run with Kay and pull her through. And they gave me a why. Because it can get boring out there. Like, right? I mean, that was the thing. I had the conversation with Corey after a couple of laps. I'm just like, I've been out here for 2 hours. I've run 8 miles. Like, what am I doing? Like, why am I here? This is, and there's more of that, but I feel like as we get older, and we've alluded to a little bit of that, but helping Kay got her to her 5th lap. She liked it. She's like, hey, can we do that again? And so we went out for the 6 yard and did the same thing. And this is the interesting thing about running, right? Is, and TG, you've talked about this, is you hit these second wins and third wins. And so that's not win as in WINS, but WINDS, right? Like you stay up late enough and you hit that next wind. And that kind of got me into that next hurdle. And I was able to kind of stretch that to around 50 miles through community, which we had 2 other guys. So one of the elements of the race is teamwork. You got 5-man teams and you're trying to go as far as you can. And that got me to my 50-mile mark. And that's what I had done before. And that got me in reach of 100K, which was a big goal. And I had gotten to 100K and I had an opportunity to shower. I had run that lap quick enough to jump in the shower and kind of clean up, and I was just feeling fresh enough to keep going, right? It was that, and I got into the mid 70s and I hit another wall. And again, it came back to community. So one of the guys running with us was Cameron Balzer, and to go back to another thing we've pulled on is context. Okay, so one of the guys I was running with was Cameron Balzer, who had just finished a 12,000-mile run around the perimeter of the United States. And so when you're running next to that guy and you're at mile 75 and thinking, gosh, and we weren't running fast, you're not running fast miles necessarily. You're just trying to get it in, right? And I'm thinking 4.167 miles in an hour, if I could run 5 more of these, I think at that time, or maybe it was 4, could get me to daylight, right? And so I set a bar out there enough that I was close enough that I could grab it, and running next to Cam and having that context, like if he can run 12,000 miles, run basically 40, 50 miles a day for 9 months straight, I think my body's capable of this. And so then you get into, I remember laying on the ground at 88 miles, and you would think at that point it'd be like, well, you've run 88 miles, you can get to 100, right? And that's when the organ, like just every part of you, you can't even keep food down. That was another thing that was like, you can't eat because your digestive system, you're running and you're basically losing 500 calories an hour. You know, if you're running 125 calories a mile, give or take, you're trying to replenish that, right? Think about eating 500 calories an hour, and you've got about 10 minutes to shove that in. If you're running a decent pace, you know, maybe if you're running fast, you got a little more time. But after about 15 laps of that, your body starts to, so then you're talking about just, again, that's where you're talking about all aspects that you just hit this level of exhaustion. And then you just start to think about, you know, and maybe you said use whatever you can, right? Another thing to draw back. Not going to lie, there was some ego that played into, I'm a few laps from saying I'm a 100-mile ultra marathoner, right? I can run 100, which is completely egotistical and whatever, but like I used it, right? And so you do, I did another one, and the sun started to come up, and we were seeing, Cameron and I, he talks about this in the documentary, we were seeing all kinds of things out there. You start to hallucinate, right? And like some of the signs and the way they were positioned, the things that we saw and the people we saw out there that disappeared as you got closer, was wild. But it's more context. Like I'd never been to a point where I was so sleep deprived and had my body to a point of exhaustion that I was seeing things that weren't there. And then we got to daylight, and that was enough to get me there. But to your point, there's probably half a dozen things that we've talked about that you just kind of try and piece together.
Well, that's probably the best story to end on right there. Do you guys have anything else related to goals or fitness or encouragement that you'd like to leave with?
I would love for you guys to finish with, what are you thinking about for 2025? You guys really didn't hit. Have you given thought to any of your goals? I think that'd be a good place to wrap up.
You want to set mine for me, as in true fashion? Mm-hmm. That's actually a little dangerous to.
Yeah, no. We'll cross that bridge. We have a couple things this year that I think would be really fun. My goal, I think I mentioned it earlier, which is just quality of life. Not ready to go full balanced yet, but you know, I have a few more big things I want to do in the road running world in the next couple of months. One of the big things I want to accomplish this year, which you will be involved in, is we've made it a habit of doing a big thing together every year. Last year, I think the first year we've missed it since I turned 40. So the first year in 5 years where we missed it, we will not be missing that this year. You do need to run Prairie on Fire in 2025. So I think that's a big one. I would love to see you out there for that.
Is that more important than the full mo? Is that, if I had to pick one, is Prairie on Fire the one?
The good news is they're like 4 months apart, so you could probably
do both.
Probably do both.
Yeah, probably do both. You know, I mean, you got an aunt that flies all the way in from Arizona. I mean, I'd really disappoint her if you didn't do the full mo. And then the community at Prairie is phenomenal. So I think you should do both of those things. But yeah, mine's quality of life, continuing to explore a little bit of lifting and, you know, grow some things together in our community.
And it sounds like I'll be running the full mo and Prairie in 2025. Okay. So we'll call that a wrap on episode 1. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully you picked up some good knowledge and you feel inspired and ready to take on 2025. Thanks, guys.